Hey guys. So I did a lot of experimentation with different methods of stop motion puppet making over the summer. I really wanted to step away from the traditional materials of clay or silicone mold making. And I came across these little bendy dolls that apparently are a pretty common summer camp project for kids using pipe cleaners and embroidery thread. And most of them included some form of wooden bead for the head. I thought that they would make a great alternative stop motion puppet with some modification. So over the next few videos, we'll talk about how to make them. In this first video, we're going to start with the body, and then in later videos, we'll talk about the head and how to make a little wig for it, as well as different costume pieces. So let's get started. I like to use an armature guide. This is one that I created in Photoshop myself. I knew about how tall I wanted my puppet to be, and then I created this sort of stick figure guide for myself. I've got, an adult size and a child size. I can also bend these differently to create more of an animal type shape once I've created the armature. So we've done that plenty of times as well. But mostly I make human figures with these armature guides. We are going to use we're going to use pipe cleaners. Some people call them chenille sticks. This will allow us to wrap the thread, and it'll give it something to hold on to. But pipe cleaners by themselves really they're not a very strong wire. So I'm going to add some aluminum wire here. I have 3 different size gauges that I'll be using. This is a 16 gauge wire. Basically, when you're dealing with wire, the smaller the number, the thicker the wire is going to be. So this is the thickest wire I have because I know that the head is going to make my puppet kind of top heavy. I'm going to use the 16 gauge wire to support the legs and the feet and the spine. That way I won't have such a problem with my puppet bowing over. Then I've got 18 gauge wire. I'll probably use this for the arms. But this is a 20 gauge wire, and this will work as well. I find these in the jewelry section of the craft stores. You can also order them in larger spools online. Just something to keep in mind, even if your wire is a thin gauge like this 20 gauge wire, you do not want to cut it with scissors. This stuff, soft aluminum wire, even this will leave little marks in your scissors. So I recommend getting yourself a decent little pair of wire cutters. I really like needle nose pliers with wire cutters in them. So I have one tool that I can use for cutting and for bending or twisting. In most of my puppet designs, I will twist my wire along the arms and the legs for a little extra stability, but because we're wrapping the thread and every little variation is going to be seen, I won't be twisting my wire. I will just be binding it together by wrapping the thread. I will probably use a little bit of glue gun here and a little bit of a hot glue here and there to keep pieces together as I'm wrapping, so I don't have to struggle so much with that. But I won't use much of it because a big glob of hot glue will distort the figure as well. All right, so here's my 16 gauge wire. I'm going to pull it straight. It's not going to be perfect, but I'm going to get it nice and straight. And now I'm going to start measuring it from the feet. Roughly, I'm just giving myself kind of a rough measurement of what I need for my wire. I know I want to double that up, so I'm going to bend my wire. I'm going to find it over here. This is basically double the legs. And then I also want to measure for the spine and the neck. So I'm going to double that up as well. And then this I know is about how much I want to go through. All right. Now I'm going to put my 2 ends together, and I'm going to pull my wire straight. I've got a little kink in it. I'm going to pull my wire straight to find the center point of my wire. Take my pliers and just squeeze that tight. Okay, now again, because I'm going to be wrapping my thread around it. I'm not going to twist my wire in this case. Normally starting from here down, I would start twisting and bringing it out into its shape, but I'm not going to do it in this case. What I may go ahead and do is from the body down, because I'm not wrapping on the body. The body is going to be covered in a different kind of way. So I'm just going to go ahead and twist my way down the body. This will give me kind of a determined place where I can start splitting the wire for the legs. And then I'm going to hold it along the armature, and I'm just going to bend it along the shape. Okay, so this is, I go for a slightly larger shoe size for many of my puppets. That way I have a little more of a foundation for them to stand on. It's not absolutely necessary to go that large if you're gonna, especially if you're gonna pin your puppets down to a board somewhere. You can make your shoe size smaller. But particularly because I teach kids how to do a lot of this stuff, I like to go with slightly larger shoe sizes. It makes them a little easier for the kids to handle. Okay, now that I've got my wire doubled over and twisted, this pelvic area, I will wrap the wire around, but you're not going to see it. It'll be hidden behind clothes. I'll wrap the thread around, I mean. But because you're not going to see it, it'll be hidden behind clothes, I'm going to go ahead and wrap the wire just to make sure that it stays in place. Okay. I've got my legs and my feet ready to go. I'm going to move these a little more forward. And I basically just want to make sure that when it stands up, I'm going to get roughly the same size feet, and it's going to feel stable. It won't like wobble from one side to the other. Now at this point, now you can leave your legs straight like this, that's okay. At this point though, I like to give my legs a little bit of an S curve to give them sort of a more natural shape, because the body isn't straight up and down. There are curves all over it. Just an extra note here, I did this step a little bit out of order. I would actually recommend putting the pipe cleaner on and wrapping the embroidery thread while the legs are straight, and then adding the natural curve. It also bends out just a little bit at the knee and kind of curves back in over the calf. So you end up with a little more of a subtle S curve from the front. So that'll kind of give us just kind of a natural feel. Now I'm going to take my Chanel stick or pipe cleaner and do the same thing with the pipe cleaner as you do with the wire. Put the tips together and then pull it to find that center point, and then you can take it, and I like to wrap it on the hip. At this point, you'll see me use a hot glue gun to help keep the pipe cleaner in place. I just want to make a couple of points. First, if I had waited to bend the wire until after I had put the pipe cleaner on and wrapped the embroidery thread, I would need to use a lot less hot glue, maybe just a dab at the top and a dab near the ankle to keep the pipe cleaner in place. Because I did this when the wire was already curved, I ended up needing to use a lot more hot glue than I really should have. Second, you will see me wipe away the hot glue on occasion. I only do this when I know that the hot glue has cooled enough that I'm not going to burn myself. Please be very careful when using a hot glue gun, because the heat is extreme enough that you can get some pretty severe burns from it. And now it's time to add the arms. I use an 18 gauge wire and measure it out along the armature guide the same way that I did with the legs, doubling the wire over. This time I add a little extra wire to make sure I don't end up running out. I can always clip off any excess later. Then I add a dab of hot glue to make sure that it doesn't slip down the neck and the spine area. If you're not comfortable doing this, then it's okay. You can just add a piece of masking tape or something else to help keep it in place. Now clip off any excess wire and add the pipe cleaner to the arms with the same steps that you used when you added it to the legs. If you end up with excess pipe cleaner, it's better to clip off the extra than it is to try to add it into the rest of the arm. That way we can keep the thickness of the arm consistent. I forgot to put the pipe cleaner up in the neck area, so I'm just using a little hot glue to adhere a piece of scrap pipe cleaner to it instead. Alright, now it's time to work on the hands. I'm going to use a 20 gauge wire for the fingers because it's nice and light and thin, but it's also strong enough that it'll hold any of the positions that I want to put my fingers in for animation purposes. Typically speaking, when your arm and hand is at rest, your fingertips will land at about mid-thigh. So that's my goal for this puppet. I am going to cut all of these finger wires a little bit longer than I actually need them to be though, so that when I adhere them to the hand, I can cut them down to the size and shape that I really want them to be. So I've ended up with 10 3/4 inch pieces of 20 gauge wire. Then I'm just testing them out on the hand area as one last check that they are what I want before I start adhering them with the hot glue gun. I know, I've said it 100 times, so here's 101. Please be very careful with that hot glue gun. This is delicate work and that glue is very hot. So now we've ended up with a bit of an Edward Scissorhands sort of look. One tip that I'd like to leave you with before you start clipping your fingers is notice that if you did kind of a dot to dot from your pinky to your thumb, you would have sort of an arch shape. Your middle finger is typically your longest finger, and then from your index to your thumb, you have this sharp drop off. So just keep that in mind when you're trimming your wires for your fingers. Then just repeat the same steps for the other hand. In order to cover the fingers, I've chosen a piece of felt that fairly closely matches the embroidery thread that I will be covering the rest of the puppet with. Then I snip off about a 1/8 inch wide strip from the side of it. Then I figure out how long I need each piece to be by folding it over the finger wires. These ended up being about 1 inch long. Better to cut a little too much than too little because you can always clip off the excess. And then I cut a piece for each finger. Okay, so now we're going to start putting our fingers on. Basically, I just like to put a little dab of glue on one side, adhere it to the finger, and then fold it over to cover the wire. I like to use my glue gun for this just because it's faster. You can use a different kind of glue to do this because I know this is really detailed work and there might be some concern about burning fingers. You just have to hold it down for longer if you're using a different type of glue. And be careful not to overdo the glue on your felt. Otherwise, you'll end up squishing it out the sides, potentially burning your fingers, or making it so that your fingers can't really bend. After I've trimmed the excess from the back and palm of the hand, I like to trim the fingertips a little bit to give them more of a natural roundness. Here's the embroidery thread that I chose for the project. Try to make sure that your pipe cleaner and your thread have a similar color, so that way if you have any little gaps in your wrapping or pieces of the pipe cleaner that are sticking out, they won't be very noticeable. Also, try to keep your embroidery thread nice and neat while you are using it. This way you don't end up spending more time untangling than you do actually covering your puppet. All right, now when I start, I'm going to take the thread and wrap it around the neck so that I've got just a little bit of excess thread right there. So that when I then start to wrap it, it's going to pin the thread in place just by virtue of, it's basically going to tie the thread in place. Now what I need to do is wrap my thread as close as I can. If I straighten my arm out, whoops, let me get that little piece in there. If I straighten my arm out, it's easier to get the thread to go around. I'm just going to keep wrapping the thread right next to itself all the way down the arm. This sounds a little bit tedious. This will take me, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes to an hour to wrap the whole body. It's not too bad. Just in case anyone is wondering, it actually took me 6.5 minutes to wrap the entire arm, including around the more complicated hand. As I start to get up here around the thumb, notice how I've covered the thumb. I'm going to come around the thumb and I'm going to keep wrapping around the hand here like this. All right, and then I'm going to glue it on the inside of the hand right here. I'm going to glue it right here, and since I've got that wire exposed, I think I might wrap it back down around the hand just a little bit more to help cover that wire. At this point, you can go ahead and add a mild S shape to your arm and then repeat the steps on the other side. We'll use the same technique on the neck and the legs as we did on the arms, using an extra piece of thread that we pin in place as we wrap around the wire. Once you've gotten to the end, you can just add a little dab of glue and wrap around it to keep your thread in place. Just as a side note, you might notice that the neck is actually extremely long. This isn't really the length that it's going to be when the puppet is all put together. We make it this long so that there's plenty of neck to go inside the head, and we can maneuver the head back and forth or side to side without having to worry about it snapping off the puppet. I decided to glue a little piece of felt to the toes so that when I finished wrapping the leg and the foot and I got to the end, I didn't have to worry about trying to coil the thread around the wire, which is a very awkward thing to do. It gave it a nice clean feel with a lot less struggle. Alright, so I've gone ahead and wrapped it. If there are a few areas where some of the pipe cleaner is sticking out, you can just take a small pair of scissors and clip it. Be careful that you don't accidentally cut the thread. You can just kind of clip some of those. I found a roll of seat cushion foam at a local fabric store that works really well for covering the body of the puppet. It's only about an inch thick, so if you need a more robust puppet, you can always glue extra pieces onto it. I cut a piece that I thought would be roughly the right size for the body, and now I'm measuring it up against the puppet itself, so I know exactly what cuts I need to make to get it to be the right size or shape. When I've cut my foam down to be roughly the right size and shape, I'll cut it through the middle so that I can put it on both the front and back of the puppet. I'm also going to trim off the sharp corners so that it has a nice natural roundness to it. So when you go from up here at the shoulders all the way into the center of the back and down, you get this sort of S shape, very much like what I have here. So I'm going to emphasize that kind of S shape on my character just a little bit by cutting into the back of my foam, just a little bit. Once I have the foam cut to the right size and shape, I'm going to test it on my puppet one more time and then I'll glue it in place. At this point, I like to take this self-adhesive ankle brace material and wrap it around the body of my puppet, because I can stretch and pull and stick, and I can kind of form what I want to out of this. So basically what I want to do is I'm going to get a length that's roughly about twice the length of my puppet's body. And I don't need to measure for top and for this space or this space here because it'll stretch, and I want it to be a little bit tight, but not very tight. Okay. And then I'm gonna fold it in half and just fold it in half like this. So basically folded it into quarters, and then I'm gonna snip just a little tiny bit off that corner there so that when I open it up again, I have a small hole that the neck can go through. Do that. And it's right in the middle. It's right over. I'm gonna pull my brace down here. Oops, and just connect it right through here. And because it sticks to itself, there's not much that I really have to do to get it to stay together unless I didn't cut a long enough piece. And then I might have to cut some more. All right. Now I can wrap it around the side. And if I want to give my puppet a little bit more shape, I can always pull it a little bit tighter in certain places. Like this. And just kind of play with it until you get what you need. There, now it's stuck together. All right, now we've finished the body, and in the next tutorial we'll talk about how to make the head.